And online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView, Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
GB News has its own late-night paper preview show, Headliners, where comedians take you through the next day's top news stories. You don't have to bother reading the newspaper, we've got it covered for you. Headliners, every night at 11 p.m. and repeated every morning at 5 a.m. We won't send you to sleep like some of the other paper review shows out there. GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Join me, Nana Akue, Saturday and Sunday afternoons on GB News. Expect fiery debate and passionate discussion as me and my panel tackle some of the biggest topics hitting the headlines. It's a place for everyone's opinion. No one gets cancelled, but no one gets an easy ride.
Oh, she's on it today!
Be ready for conversations that are fierce, frank, and of course, fun. Every Saturday and Sunday afternoon from 4 p.m. on GB News, the People's Channel.
Join me, Camilla Tominey, on Sunday mornings from 9:30, taking the politicians to task and breaking out of SW1 to see how their decisions are affecting you across the UK. Bursting the Westminster bubble every Sunday morning, only on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain's watching.
Good evening, I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg. State of the Nation, tonight. Mystic Mogg's mea culpa. Alas, I was wrong. The Chancellor's decided to go ahead with the corporation tax rise, but there's lots to get through with today's budget, and we'll be debating it all shortly. And the shirking from home debate persists, as new data suggest that a third of the public would quit their jobs if forced to work full-time at the office. Sounds to me like they already quit their jobs some time ago. But Vox Populi Vox Dei. We asked you, the people, if they would quit their jobs if forced to work at the office. And here's a taste of what they had to say.
Working from home is really depressing in my opinion.
Very sound from the gentleman in Birmingham. State of the Nation starts now. Hearing from our acclaimed panel. Fleet Street legend, if he can get here in the traffic, Kelvin Mackenzie, and Labour MP for Brighton, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. As ever, I really want to hear from you. Please get in touch by emailing mailmog@gbnews.uk. But before all of that, it's been an exceptionally busy day, and here to keep us up to date is Polly Middlehurst.
Jacob, thank you, and good evening to you. It has indeed been a busy day for Jeremy Hunt, the Chancellor, who's vowed to encourage millions to rejoin the workforce and boost Britain's financial growth in his first budget as Chancellor. Mr Hunt said the Office for Budget Responsibility now forecasts the UK will no longer enter a recession this year. Instead, he said, inflation is predicted to fall from 10.7%, that's at the end of last year, to 2.9% by the end of 2023. Let's bring you the key points of the budget so far. The measures include a reduction in duty paid on draft beer and cider in pubs, A further 12-month freeze on fuel duty. Also abolishing the lifetime allowance on tax-free pension savings, which at one point was £1 million, and extending the current energy price guarantee for a further 3 months, as well as bringing prepayment meter charges in line with those who pay by direct debit. The Chancellor also outlined an increase to the defence budget worth £11 billion over the next 5 years. And he freed the way for more women to return to work. Eligible households will be offered 30 hours of free childcare a week for every child over the age of 9 months.
Never seen before such a comprehensive attempt to say that in this country, if people want to work, we should take away the barriers. And that doesn't matter if you're an older person, someone who's disabled, someone who's looking for work, a parent worried about childcare costs. The government is on your side. If you want to work, we want to help you.
Well, the Labour leader, Sir Keir Starmer, called the budget a sticking plaster.
His opening boast was that things aren't quite as bad now as they were in October last year after the kamikaze budget. And the more that he pretends everything is fine, the more he shows just how out of touch they are. After 13 years of his government, our economy needed major surgery. But like millions across our country, this budget leaves us stuck in the waiting room with only a sticking plaster to hand.
And in news away from the budget, concerned with events in the United States, the London Stock Exchange has suffered its worst losses since the start of the COVID pandemic, as fears of a banking crisis globally intensify. Here in London, the FTSE 100 closed down more than 292 points as global banking stocks fell just days after the collapse of the Silicon Valley Bank in the States. Credit Suisse was one of the worst affected, seeing its share price drop by a quarter to a new record low. That comes a day after the bank told investors it had failed to identify any risk in its financial reporting. And lastly, NASA has unveiled a prototype of the spacesuit set to be worn by the next generation of astronauts as they walk on the moon's surface. Not white, it's black this time, with orange markers, and features a light band and high-definition camera as well. It offers greater mobility than its predecessors and will be used during the Artemis mission, which is scheduled for 2025. That's all the news from the GB Newsroom for now. We're back at 9 o'clock. Let's get now to Jacob Rees-Mogg.
The soothsayer said, "Beware the Ides of March." And when Caesar commented that the Ides of March had come, he said, "But not yet gone." And today is, of course, the Ides of March, and it's been Budget Day. Are the auguries good or are they bad? Will we find that this is success or not? Well, there have certainly been some attractive baubles, some sweeties, if you like, the pick and mix sweeties that you might get in a corner store that you could pick out. One of them, one of the best ones, I think the cream egg of the budget, was the pension changes, which will allow doctors to stay and work, will allow people to build up savings, and actually will release investment to the benefit of the economy, because pension saving is a great source of long-term stable investment. As long, of course, as these changes stick, because pensions have been muddled about with much too much in recent years and in recent decades. The freeze on fuel duty, something I think most GB News viewers will be really pleased about, that those of us who use our cars, and I use mine a lot, will be really pleased that fuel duty isn't going up, and it has an effect on the whole economy. All the goods and services that we use that get transported around the country, and of course, a draft pint is going to be cheaper in a pub. So I'll encourage all of you to visit the Crown in West Harptree, which is a fine place to go to and serves the best beer in Somerset. Not that I should probably be giving adverts for my local public house. So, this is all splendid, and we don't need to worry about British ale being warm. This used to confuse me when I first went to America, and they'd talk about warm beer. And I thought, what are you on about? It's not warm, it's just at room temperature. The reason is American beer is not really drinkable unless it's frozen, and that's why they differentiate between their frozen, undrinkable beer and the glorious beer that you can drink across this country, though if you're in Somerset, you may prefer cider. But crucial to this whole budget is the phantasmagoria that exists between the government and the OBR. Please read the OBR's booklet, because it says that the government, since the OBR was founded only in 2010, has had 6 sets of fiscal rules. Now, these sets of fiscal rules are the basis for policy against which the OBR makes its forecasts. But they're essentially a pretense, because whenever they're not met, they get changed. The forecasts are then wrong. So you have a pretend fiscal rule with a pretend forecast, which doesn't really lead to fundamental economic reform, which we need, because we tax too much and we spend too much. Look what happened when Margaret Thatcher was Prime Minister, or was influencing policy. Between 1981 and 1993, tax as a percentage of GDP went down from about 33% to 27%. After a period of socialist government, coalition and Tory government, it's gradually risen since then to higher levels, and this budget will not bring it back down again. But to bring it back down, as Liz Truss proved with her efforts to bring tax down, we need to cut spending as well. The two have to go hand in glove. And we could start with abolishing the reign of quangos. Quangos that interfere in every part of our lives, employ too many people, and don't add to productivity or efficiency. We could start with HR departments, which has been one of the great employers of people who don't actually add to productivity. That's not to say some people in HR aren't wonderful people, because they are, but there are too many of them. And it's the managerial revolution, as the political theorist James Burnham once phrased it, and it's the managers who are deciding how our lives are led. But let's go on to childcare, because that's one of the goodies of the budget. But I wonder whether it's the sort of Kinder Egg with a plastic toy inside that people aren't so keen on in the end. The government is responding to public demand and the fact that childcare costs have been rising higher than wages. But is the state the answer to everything, especially given the nature of the state and how it wants to turn children out? And will it make woke people rather than the young pioneers that we might think would be better for the prosperity of our nation? And does it take responsibility away from the family? I think I'm responsible for my children with my wife, rather than the state being responsible. And there's something we should be careful about, thinking that it's better that the only people who get paid to look after your children are strangers, but there's no financial advantage if it's members of the family. Couldn't we offer choice? In Hungary, and I must confess I have a personal preference in favour of this, having 6 children, if you've got 4 children, then the mother pays no tax. And then that money could be spent on childcare or be used for the family to spend the time raising the children themselves. So it's welcome because people want it and we want to get people into work to be more productive, but is it the right answer in its entirety? As always, I want to know what you think. Get in touch, email me at mailmog@GBNews. But I'm delighted to be joined by Miriam Cates, Conservative MP for Penistone and Stocksbridge, who is a great expert on childcare. Miriam, what are your thoughts on what's been announced today?
Well, I'm very pleased that Jeremy Hunt has signalled that he wants to invest in the early years. I think that's very welcome. They're very important, those first 2 or 3 years of a child's life. But I think fundamentally this is the wrong answer to the wrong question. And you've mentioned rising childcare costs, and it's true, you know, costs to families in all sorts of ways have gone up. But one of the oft-repeated mantras, which the Chancellor himself said today, is that in Britain we have the highest childcare costs in comparable countries. And that's not actually true. Our childcare costs are not particularly higher higher than anywhere else. The problem is there are a higher proportion of families' net income. And the problem with that is that net income is low because our taxation is so high. And you alluded to this, in your comparison with Hungary, but in many, many other similar countries, families are not taxed or not taxed anywhere near as much as British families because the tax system recognise the importance of and the cost of raising children. So the issue we have in this country is not the cost of childcare, it's how little of income families get to keep. And I think also, although many people will welcome this policy, it doesn't provide choice. And again, you mentioned this in your opening statement. And many mothers do want to go back to work, but many mothers don't, and they want to look after their own children, particularly babies under 2. And I very much question, is this the right policy for children and families?
So it's very good for mothers who want to go back to work. It will provide them with more choice and more ability to go back to work, and the wraparound care will help with older children too. But what you're saying is that that's assuming that everybody wants to go back to work.
Yes, and I think there are certainly many women who do want to go back to work. And I think particularly if you've got a high-flying, high-paid, successful career, of course it's worth that trade-off, and perhaps you can afford to pay for a nanny or some, very high-quality childcare. But if you're stacking shelves in Tesco or filling in data, which are important jobs, and you make very little money once tax has gone and childcare's gone, is it worth that time that you don't spend with your children? But I also question whether it will actually work, because, as you know, there's an existing 30 hours entitlement for parents of 3- and 4-year-olds, but the uptake of that is only about 40%. And evidence suggests that free childcare doesn't really affect people's choice of how to use childcare.
Well, my constituents write to me saying that that 30 hours free doesn't actually work because it doesn't pay enough, and therefore the childcare providers say, we'll only give you that if you pay for more hours, and so it's not really 30 hours for free. Have you been getting similar correspondence?
Yes, absolutely, and often nurseries have to charge parents for nappies or meals or things like that. But it's also very inflexible. It's office hours, or actually fewer than office hours, it's term time only. So again, if you've got an office job or a professional job, it might work. But if you do shift work, which a lot of women do, then it doesn't work and you can't use it because it's so inflexible. So as you said in the beginning, this is state help, but only under certain conditions, and it doesn't promote choice. Now, £4 billion is a lot of money. Why not give that £6,500 a year to families as credits or as a budget like they do in other countries, and then you can choose it. Pay granny to look after your child, work fewer hours, use formal childcare if you want to. That's a far more conservative way of looking at this problem.
Well, I suppose the Chancellor's answer to that would be that we need more people in the workforce because we've got 1 million vacancies, and having 1 million vacancies is being inflationary in terms of wages and feeding through, that actually the state has an interest in getting more people into work, and that's a valid interest for the state to have.
Well, yes, but our problem is actually a productivity one, isn't it? And I think what you see in countries which do send women back to work very early, and the Chancellor used the example of Denmark, is as female participation in the workplace rises, so does your gender pay gap, because as you send more women back to work, you create jobs in childcare and elderly care sectors that unfortunately don't pay very much, but mostly women do. So you create this gender pay gap. But I really question this assumption that women's primary value or mothers' primary value is in the workplace contributing to GDP, because the job of a parent, particularly in those first 2 years of life, is a huge investment to their future success. And I know from the work that I've done with Andrea Leadsom, the early years, the first 1,001 days, the attachment with mum in those first 2 years is so important and has been scientifically proven for later life, that I don't think this is the right policy for women or children. Of course, women should have the choice, and many women want to go back to work, and that's fine, but it should be a choice.
And what's going to happen between now and 2024 when the policy comes in? Because there's a bit of a delay. Do you think people assume it's immediate and they'll be disappointed when they don't get it tomorrow?
Well, they may well do, and obviously that is the way with headlines. And I think even if I supported this policy, I would absolutely recognise that there needs to be some supply-side reform first. We know lots of nurseries are closing. We know there are recruitment problems in the sector. So, of course, there needs to be time. But, I very much hope that time is for a rethink, to give more choice to this policy, to pay families in child benefit, to reduce tax, to give more choice, rather than seeing this as the only option.
And to come back to a point I made earlier, the only people who can't be paid to look after children are members of the family. That seems to me to be slightly problematic, because it insists, therefore, that it's always done by strangers, whereas inevitably members of the family will have a a greater affection, particularly for tiny children, where that's so important.
Absolutely. No one is more invested in the future of a child than their biological parents and their relatives. And I think, again, this just feeds into the narrative that you need professionals to look after your children and your child must have early years education. Of course, that's not true. All a baby, all a young child needs is love and protection and care. You know, you don't need to know phonics and maths before you start school. Actually, you need a safe, secure environment. And again, you know, it just feeds into this narrative that the only value of parents is in the workplace, whereas actually the biggest contribution most of us can make to society is by being a good parent with enough time, energy and resource to invest in our children. It's a hard job, as you and I both know, and you can't do that if you're really struggling to spend time with your children.
Well, I think what you're saying is very compelling. I've always been very lucky. I mean, I've got 6 children, but I do have a bit of support to help with it, and my wife takes the major part of the burden on. But thank you so much for coming along again. You're becoming a regular visitor, and I hope that will continue. Thank you very much to Miriam. Don't forget to let me know what you think. Mailmog at gbnews.uk. After the break, as this is the People's Channel, we'll be hearing from the people themselves about their thoughts on working, or as I call it, shirking from home. You won't want to go anywhere.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512,
Virgin Media Channel 604,
Freesat Channel 216,
Freeview Channel 236,
and YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio,
with the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit up.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions are, those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on. He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, Nana, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News,
The People's Channel,
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back. I'm still Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this is State of the Nation Tonight. You've been getting in touch with your thoughts. So, Rob, on childcare, instead of giving mothers 30 hours allowance for childcare, why don't they just give the money to the mothers and let them look after their own children? That's far too simple for politicians to like an idea like that. Carol, on corporation tax, why did the government spend billions to keep companies afloat during the pandemic only to now deduct more money through increasing corporation tax to 25%. That is a very fair point. And Sean, on corporation tax, how can the UK charge 25% while Ireland charges 12%? It's insane. If you and Nigel run for election under reform, we will vote for you. Don't worry, I won't. I'm afraid I am Tory through and through, and I won't run for reform or any other party. So going back to home shirking, it's emerged from new LinkedIn data that over a third of employees would quit their jobs if they were forced to work in the office full-time. Whereas it seems to me that working in the office full-time is having a job. That's what people have signed up to do. Interestingly, I think it found that younger people were keener to be in the office, and it's people of my age who probably have quite comfortable living arrangements who are keener to shirk. But no doubt there are legitimate reasons for hybrid working. There may be people who have particular conditions that mean they have to do this, but not for quite so many people. It seems to me it's one of the many disastrous lockdown legacies which we're still yet to eliminate. As I see it, people who aren't going into the office have semi-detached themselves from their employer already. Well, Vox Populi Vox Dei, we ask you, the people, if they would quit their jobs if forced to work from the office full-time, and the people of Birmingham have spoken.
I would go there, honestly. I would do it because working from home is really depressing in my opinion, because you've not got like your workers to speak to if you've got a question to ask, for example.
I'm quite lucky to work in a really nice place. I have really good colleagues, and the people I interact with on a daily basis are good, and it's fulfilling. So I personally wouldn't in my current role.
I think it's a good idea for them to go back because, you know, because inflation's gone up and everything's expensive. So I think it's quite better that people can, you know, start going back to work.
It depends on the job. Some jobs are good, some jobs are bad. If it's a good job, brilliant. You've got a nice working environment.
Well, just showed the point that the younger people seem to be keen on getting into work. So thank you to the people who answered for us. But I'm now joined by my great panel, the former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Come on, Kelvin. Do you think they're shirking, or are they working very hard at home and am I being unfair?
I think you're probably being unfair, but I think more importantly, I'm afraid the train has left the station on this argument.
Oh, it's not, it's on strike.
Well, yeah, it won't leave the train to the station tomorrow, you're quite right. And didn't if you were in the underground today, you're quite right. And on Saturday. Thanks very much, RMT. Yes, the game's up. Companies actually don't want you to come in either now because they can downscale the size of their offices. It saves them a hell of a lot of money. And I do agree with you. It stops... how you train a younger person in some of the skills of the office is difficult, but the main reason is this. Most of those jobs now are between £25,000 and £40,000. People have no actual connection with their place of work, and they're looking constantly to go to other jobs between £25,000 and £40,000, whichever one will offer them the most amount of freedom for their life outside work. It's a quite interesting change, and unless we break that down, I'm afraid you're going to see more home working, and you're also going to see a total detachment from industry to industry. So at one stage, oh, I'm an expert in plastics, I'm an expert in brewery or something, only because you've done it for 35 or 40 years. You knew everything. Now somebody who is doing accounts one place can actually get another 1,500, 2 grand somewhere else and can actually spend an extra day at home. And the other people behind it are the bosses. Why? Because it's the bosses who have the bigger houses that can have the offices, and they suddenly discover that they don't need to leave at 6 and get home at 8 as they thought. They see their kids. They quite like taking them to school. They actually quite like the wife. There are a lot of change going on at the same time.
But Lloyd, we've got a productivity problem in this country. We've had one now for 30 years. If people are working at home, doesn't it seem less likely that we're going to solve the productivity problem?
Well, we know, don't we, that countries that have more flexible working or shorter working weeks have higher productivity, and countries that have extremely long working weeks have generally lower productivity. Now, not necessarily a strict correlation, There are some outliers, but broadly that is the pattern. And so I don't think it is clear that being in the workplace and the office means that you are less or more productive. What I do think is workplace culture. We have had in Britain, I think, a culture where in the workplace you not only work but you socialise, and a lot of time in the office is actually spent socialising in the office. And I think a lot of people have realised, well, I could have better quality socialisation in my community, and then I can go into the office and work intensively better, not have to socialise with people in my office, but socialise with people in my street. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that, but we do then need to change some of the ways that we work. So, for example, do you want someone eating their lunch just at home, never leaving their house for 2 or 3 days at a time? Or do we want to create systems where you can work from local hubs, a local cafe, so you still meet people and interact with people?
Can I bring you back to the productivity point? Because I'm finding that my constituents are not getting good service from DVLA, HMRC, the Passport Office has got a bit better, Office of Public Guardian. Now, all these bodies are working from home. Is that sheer coincidence, or do you think it's correlated?
Well, I think that there is some coincidence around it, because we have seen a breakdown in public services, in the resources to public services. We've had massive cuts to national and local government, means that they just have less staff. And even if they're in the office, they're not able to provide those services.
But the Passport Office has taken on more people, DVLA has been recruiting people, the Office of Public Guardian has been taking on more people.
Well, and in the DVLA and the Passport Office, we have much higher demand. Passport Office for both a backlog of COVID, but also in terms of the changing Brexit arrangements. All of those things have changed. You know, the need for young children to have passports nowadays. When you and I were children, we were just added to our parents.
That's a long time ago.
Added to our parents'
we're not that
passports.
old, but still, that changed a long time ago.
But, you know, there's a general changing pattern. But I do think there is a case that you say is right, which is that in my local council, so I don't think it's national government so much matters, but where you have face-to-face services, where they have been taken away, where they have been shut, the counters have been shut, and same with the police sometimes, and you're told, ring a telephone and someone will assist you later on. There, I think people have seen a reduction in service, and so it is not as simple as saying everyone can work from home and everyone can't. There are some jobs that will allow it, and there are some jobs that won't. And I think what you'll see is the jobs that don't allow working from home will have to start paying a decent amount more.
Absolutely
and the jobs that do allow working from home will actually be less.
I totally agree. Police officer, I'm afraid, are not going to work from home. The fire workers not going to work from home. They're going to want more money. I absolutely guarantee it. I'll tell you something else that's happened. You take my local council, Elmbridge Council in Esher, very wealthy area, right? You could fire a cannon there every single day and never hit an employee, right? Basically, local government are, quotes, working from home, unquotes. It's incredible. And for instance, I know a case, in fact, I think it's down in the Sussex Health Service, where they hired a finance director. The finance director lives in Yorkshire and only comes in 1 day a week.
But are people getting the service? Because I get lots of complaints in my constituency from people applying for planning permission who get no answer, who it takes months for, because there's nobody in the office, there's no one they can talk to.
Now, it is true. You would have thought with this system you would get to somebody more quickly. Actually, with the phone, perhaps not. With that, no. What has happened is that people can be lazy. Why? Why? Because there isn't a boss glowering or asking or having the Monday morning meeting. It is true, actually, it sounds a bit old-fashioned, this. It is true, you can Zoom it all. But with Zooming, people are turning them off all the time.
I doubt you'd let anyone work from home when you were editing The Sun. But thank you to my brilliant panel, who will be back shortly. Still ahead, was the Chancellor's budget a betrayal, like the unions have painted it? We'll be talking to a man renowned for his scepticism of collective action. Don't get anywhere, it's going to be an exciting segment.
I joined GB News because I was sick and tired of not hearing my views being represented, not just mine, but so many people that I knew and spoke to.
I just couldn't get my voice out there. I couldn't say anything. I couldn't do anything. Whatever the narrative was, I kind of had to follow it.
GB News is there to provide a voice for those who have been ignored by the establishment media. We think different things, we've got a different style.
GB News is here to be optimistic and positive about the future.
It's real kind of dynamic and flowing, with the audience very much at the heart of it, like a big family.
Here at GB News, we talk about the things that matter to you.
Hearing the voices from right across our towns and cities, especially our towns.
All sides of the argument represented with a heavy dose of opinion.
We're on a mission here to make a difference. And the GB News family really is here for you, and whatever time of day you can watch or listen.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Westminster is going around in ever-decreasing circles, followed by the media. Britain is broken. How on earth did we get into this mess? But more importantly, how do we get out of it? Join me at 7 p.m, Mondays to Thursdays on Farage, here on GB News. We will have open, rational debate. We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this. Join us here on GB News, the People's Channel. Britain is watching.
You've probably seen politicians interviewed 1,000 times, but we do it differently. We find out who they really are, we don't shout, we chat, and hopefully we bring a bit of light, not just heat. Did you know, Kate Moss?
Apparently.
Do you have a pair of jeans or a pair of jeans?
No, of course I don't. What would I do with them?
My friends are like, oh my God, what's she doing now?
Join me every Sunday at 6 for Gloria Meets, only on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, the Member of Parliament for North East Somerset and a former government minister. For years I've walked the corridors of power in both Westminster and the City of London. I campaigned in the largest democratic vote in our island story. I know this country has so much to be proud of. We need to have the arguments, the discussions on how we make it better. The wisdom of the nation is in its people. Vox Populi, Vox Dei. That's why I'm joining the People's Channel. Join me Monday to Thursday at 8 p.m. on GB News, Britain's news channel.
I'm Mark White. As GB News Home and Security Editor, I cover those key issues that are so important to you. Our authorities, our communities doing all they can to combat violent crime. With the public services under unbearable strain, why are we still failing to control our borders? Defence, the first priority of any government, has been continually hollowed out. Can we trust our politicians to protect the armed forces? Join me, Mark White, on GB News.
Welcome back to State of the Nation. I remain Jacob Rees-Mogg, and you've been getting in touch with your male Moggs. So Dawn, on working from home. Lockdown has made people think they're entitled to work from home now. We all know that with no supervision, working from home means you're working half the time. As the cat's away, the mice will play, I think, is how Dawn is putting it. Ian, he says, well, my colleagues are based in London, Dublin, Madrid, Barcelona, India, Belarus and California. Which office do I suggest he goes to? It's a very good question. India's a very nice place to be. Simon, one of your guests beat me to it. A lot of companies are making just as much money with people working from home, and they've been able to downsize their office space and save money, hence more profits for the company. The problem with the government is they've still got all the office space, it's merely empty, and that is a terrible waste of money. And Julian on Miriam Cates, I will make sure Miriam gets to hear this. The most common sense I've heard from a Conservative MP in years. Well, we've got Lloyd to give us common sense from a Labour MP for the next part of the discussion. But this afternoon, unions lampooned the Chancellor, they slightly would, wouldn't they, after he made, quote, no effort, unquote, to address higher pay for the public sector in his budget speech. 500,000 workers went on strike today. Many picketed, some probably outside their own living rooms, but some outside government offices, hospitals, train stations and schools to demand higher pay and better working conditions. Mr Hunt has found money to freeze draft duty on beer, petrol duty and sort out pensions. Has he betrayed the public sector? Well, I'm going to turn to my panel on this. As before, former editor of The Sun, Kelvin Mackenzie, and the Labour MP, Lloyd Russell-Moyle. Lloyd, I'm going to give you the first go on this because you're representing the opposition, the Labour Party's close to the unions. Do you think it was a betrayal?
Well, betrayal is not the word that I would necessarily use, but clearly if he wants to stop the disputes, if he wants to deal with the cost of living crisis, if he wants to deal with the pay settlements, all of which he said he wanted to in the rhetoric of the speech, but then proposed no methods to actually do that. And we know from all the economic forecasts that inflation is not being led or driven by pay rises, and there is not a real danger of that happening. It is a commodity-led inflation crisis, and actually a pay increase will see potentially more money in our economy, not less.
But do you think it's right for people like school teachers to go on strike, particularly when children suffered so much during the pandemic when they were kept at home for months on end? Doesn't it seem deeply selfish?
I think it's a right for almost all workers to go on strike, except maybe some very small exceptions where you're dealing with absolute public safety, you know, kind of police officers and prison officers clearly are slightly exceptional. I do think that where you are dealing with people who you're having to care for, as we know in the health service, it is right that the unions sit down and work out a way that emergency care is always covered, and they do that by negotiation. But I think it is a right that people can say, I do not want, we don't live in slave labour, I do not want to give my labour to you unless I can negotiate better terms and conditions. Unless I can get better terms and conditions, I'm effectively walking. The problem is if you run an economy where everyone just walks and gets a job, it actually creates instability. So it's better to be able to do that on a collective basis where then you sit down and negotiate. And the unions have done that very effectively with the private sector. If you look at the car manufacturing sector in this country, Unite, the union, has been very good at sitting down and working out productivity deals that help win-win on all sides. The problem is, I'm afraid, your government, Jacob, is...
His Majesty's government, but leaving that to one side.
The government that you helped to prop up, and I do everything to get rid of, I think is taking too much of an ideological point of view, not trying to sit down and work out a deal for the workers. Bearing in mind, in the private sector, the average pay increase over the last 10 years has been 1.6%, whereas the average pay increase for, say, a teacher or a junior doctor has been almost minus 10 to 15%.
Calvin, you were once the scourge of the unions.
I hope I still am, yeah.
You still are. Do you think the government's betrayed the public sector?
One of the few things that I've admired this government for, and sooner, is actually standing up to these bullies. These are people who can cause you a lot of personal pain. The BMA's reaction to this, in the way that they have deliberately not told hospitals who's going out and what's going to do, and offered any assistance at all. At least the ambulance people did deals on a local basis. These guys are saying go through the national. You know, the idea of picking out the phone, ridiculous and disgraceful. But look, at the end of the day, everybody is going to have to take pain. Why the public sector think that they can have less pain. Now, I admire a union that you're connected with, which is the Fire Brigade Union, right, who did a deal, backdated 7% to last July and 5% from the summer, OK? It's less than inflation, yes. Well, actually, we learned today that inflation at the end of the year is going to be 2.9%. So why on earth don't these people say, we will do what the FBU are doing, right? It's beyond me. But I hate what they're doing. What the RMT are doing to the southeast, they're probably enjoying it, I don't know. They must have cost their employees, the employees of the RMT, thousands of pounds now. What have they achieved? People are working from home, and actually more of them now will work.
Not RMT stuff, but the FBU example is a good example, because the Fire Brigade is one of the few compulsorily negotiated wage boards that we have left in this country. I think it is the only nationwide one that we have left in the public sector, where the employers and the unions, they don't have a pay review board, they sit down and negotiate every year. And that, I think, ends up meaning you have less industrial action. You have some nice threats of it, of course, because they sit down and they understand to thrash out a deal. In all the others, it's been taken out of the hands of union leaders and politicians to these pay review boards, and what has built up is a huge level of back pay in these sectors where they've not been paid fairly compared to the private sector.
But
and now, of course, we have this crisis.
Well, why don't they say, look, Why don't they just have the back channels? I mean, all these organisations have back channels and simply say, look, if you offer us the FBU deal, we'll take that.
Well, in Wales, the strikes have been suspended in certain sectors because the government has done that. But this government has not has refused to do that.
But the peer review boards were brought in because of the strikes in the 80s in essential services, because it was seen as a fair way of doing it, and that there would be an independent body that would give recommendations.
No, the removal of properly nationally negotiated terms and conditions is something that has been happening over the last 15 years. And it has reduced the ability. There's nothing wrong with having a recommendation, but it's reduced the ability to negotiate.
These are politically motivated strikes. Nobody can tell me that the RMT wouldn't take the money, but they don't want to lose the employees. What right has a union to say, we aren't going to do this, we're not going to do that?
In Wales, they've managed to do a deal, including some changes of work patterns, because they were able to sit down with a reasonable government.
But Lynch & Co. are actually Marxists disguised as extreme socialists.
But they're destroying the railways anyway, aren't they? That, as Kelvin was saying, if you weren't working from home already, you'll work from home now if you can't possibly commute.
They're not destroying us, are they, honestly, in the way that they hoped they would?
Railway usage will change. It will change to be more of a leisure service. It will change to actually... And we see this already, particularly on the Brighton line, where it's sometimes more crowded on the weekends than it is on commuter times.
You won't get it this Saturday because they're on strike.
Yes, well, the thing is, sometimes we get a better service when they're on strike than when they're actually working.
We'll have to have another discussion on the future of the railways, and we'll have to talk about HS2 and whether that's good value for money with all the billions, 100 billion that may be going into that. My panel, great fun there, feisty debaters, so I think that was excellent. But coming up next, I'll be addressing yesterday's failed Mystic Mogg prediction. Keep Mogg on the box, but not Nostradamus.
Coming up on Dan Wootton tonight, in an exclusive interview, the former Home Secretary, Priti Patel, delivers her frank and honest verdict on high-tax Hunt's so-called budget for growth. Tune in for a rare insight into one of the Conservatives' sharpest political minds as she lays out her vision for a better Britain. Don't miss Dan Wootton tonight, 9 p.m. to 11 p.m. on GB News.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.
You can find us on Sky Channel 512.
Virgin Media Channel 604.
Freesat Channel 216.
Freeview Channel 236.
And YouView Channel 236.
You can also take us with you on DAB Plus Radio.
With the GB News app and at the website gbnews.uk.
We're absolutely everywhere.
Come join us on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Monday to Thursday, 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. Join me, Dan Wootton. I'll bring you the sharpest takes and hottest debates.
Do you not believe in prison?
I don't believe in prison.
I'm completely stunned.
I guarantee you there'll be no spin, no bias, no censorship.
I actually was personally quite offended by it.
And no reason to go to bed.
So I guess they've always been quite woke.
That's Dan Wootton tonight on TV, radio and online. Monday to Thursday from 9 p.m. till 11 p.m. on GB News. The People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
Hello, I'm Michelle Dewberry, and you can join me every weekday 6 till 7 on Jubes and Kerr.
You're an inspiration to us all.
Clip that bit off.
Well, you are.
That's my ringtone. My political ambitions those days are gone, I can tell you.
She's only teasing. Go on.
He's probably going to want to lay down now. I'll give him 2 minutes to have one. Let's respectfully disagree. That's what we like on Jubes and Kerr. Come and join us. GB News, the People's Channel.
Michelle Dewberry, weekday evenings at 6 o'clock.
I'm Simon Evans. Join me on GB News for Headliners at 11 p.m.
What's the scoop?
I'll be joined by 2 of the country's top comedians.
That's right.
As we take a look at tomorrow's newspapers tonight.
We're going to get into trouble.
If it's a big story, we'll be covering it.
Spill some tea on him.
There we go.
But we'll also have some fun.
I wouldn't stick up a bank.
My father didn't love me.
So anyway.
Headliners every night from 11 on GB News, the People's Channel, Britain's news channel.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
Welcome back to State of the Nation with me, Jacob Rees-Mogg. You've been getting in touch with your mail mogs, so Dawn says civil servants want a Labour government next. Just like the trade union strikers, Sue Gray is proof to confirm the civil servants' long-suspected left-leaning bias. So, as I confessed earlier, my prediction that the Chancellor wouldn't follow through with the corporation tax hike turned out not to come to fruition, and I made the mistake that professional horoscope makers don't make of phrasing myself clearly. Normally, you have to say it in such a vague way that whatever happens, you can say you got it right. Read Nostradamus if you don't believe me. His predictions are fantastically vague, and he got them by, I think, looking into a bowl of water and seeing what patterns formed. Anyway, enough of Nostradamus, which I'm not going to make a career. At a time like this, I strongly believe, and have a feeling the Chancellor does too, that we now need to be incentivising business both to remain in and to enter the United Kingdom. We want to be ensuring that business does well and pays lower taxes. But I'm joined by a particularly distinguished Professor of Economics at King's College London and former Chief Economist at the Cabinet Office, Jonathan Portes, and you broadly support the corporation tax hikes. You don't have the fear that I do that they will discourage investment in this country.
Well, remember that the Chancellor at the same time is continuing with the corporation tax hike, which of course Rishi Sunak announced a couple of years ago, so it's not new, it's just implementing what was already decided. He has introduced what's called full expensing for investment. What that means is that you can, if you invest, you can write off the value of that investment against your profits 100% in the first year. And actually, on balance, that ought to mostly outweigh the disincentive to invest that comes from having higher corporation tax. So it's not ideal. Of course, we'd all like a lower tax burden for business, but I think he's gone quite a lot of the way towards repairing the potential damage to investment that the hike would otherwise have done. So it's at least a glass half full rather than completely empty.
The answer that I would give to that, or the challenge I'd give to that, is the increase you got in tax take when the reverse was done, when George Osborne got rid of the write-offs but reduced the rate very significantly. And the GDP share of corporation tax went, I think, from 2.3 to 2.9%. So it was a big GDP increase in corporation tax.
It didn't change very much from the previous trend. And most of the estimates we have from that period suggest that the tax changes made a pretty marginal difference. And you see, I mean, it's the evidence of that period that the OBR is incorporating in what they're saying today about what today's tax changes will mean on corporation to investment. And it doesn't make a huge amount of difference. These things matter, but they don't matter that much. And I'm afraid to say, you know, what we have, the big evidence, I'm afraid, of the last 6 or 7 years is that things like uncertainty and the cost of Brexit actually have a more damaging impact on investment than the headline rate of corporation tax, because what the OBR says is we've now got pretty clear evidence that Brexit has reduced investment, and that's one of the reasons why the growth forecast going forward is so dismal.
There's also been a COVID pandemic and other things. But
but that's what they get that by looking at comparing us to other countries. It's not about COVID.
Well, that seems to have had quite a big impact, and the UK is a particularly open market, though we came out of it earlier thanks to not being in the European Union and getting ahead with our vaccine. But to go back to corporation tax, if you look at the Irish experience, there were figures out fairly recently, I saw them today, that corporation tax raises more money in the Republic of Ireland than VAT at 12.5%. Doesn't this make you think that actually having a very low rate could be significantly beneficial? Bear in mind, as you know, the Republic of Ireland has a very similar VAT regime to the one in the UK.
Well, I mean, the Republic of Ireland has become very successful in getting particular types of large, mostly US multinationals, especially pharmaceutical companies, some IT companies, to set up and to route their profits via Ireland. I don't know anybody who thinks that you know, that is a large part of the Irish miracle and the Irish economic model within the EU. I don't think anyone realistically thinks that is viable for an economy the size and structure of the UK. Even if we'd stayed in the EU, let alone being outside of it, it's just not going to happen.
But if it would attract international investment, get money flowing through, and corporation tax is ultimately falls on individuals, doesn't it? Because the companies charge prices and employ people, and that a corporate structure will be interested in its net margin rather than its gross margin. So if you increase the tax burden, it will have to increase its prices or reduce its employment. So the economic effect is quite a direct one.
That's right. I mean, ultimately, the taxes are paid by people, although, of course, part of the burden of corporation tax falls on people who own shares and get dividends as well as employers. But broadly, you're right. Companies don't pay tax. Households and people pay tax. So there is no free lunch here. On that, you're absolutely right. But equally, I think that while putting up the rate of corporation tax isn't going to be beneficial to the UK economy. I don't think anyone would suggest that. The downside impacts of doing that at the same time as raising the tax, improving the tax treatment of investment, improving R&D tax credits. I don't think the Chancellor has actually done a bad job here with the difficult hand that he's been given. The alternative being, is to increase tax on people somewhere else, right?
Well, except if you're taking with one hand and giving back with the other, the net effect isn't enormous. And the question, I suppose, is it better, which I would argue it is, to have a simple tax system with low rates and few write-offs, or should you have a more complicated system with higher rates but lots of way of getting that rate down?
I mean, I think overall I'd agree with you. The evidence is less clear for corporation tax. There is some evidence a simple system is better, but one with relatively high rates and more generous write-offs does appear to produce at least as good results, looking at the international evidence. But more broadly, I think you raise an important point about the overall tax system. People complain about taxes being too high. I don't actually myself think they are too high for the structure of economy we have. But we have hugely overcomplicated the tax system, and that's a bipartisan point under government.
That is a great point on which to end and a point of agreement. But Jonathan, thank you so much for coming in. That's all from us. Next is Dan Wootton. Mr. Wootton, in addition to the brilliant Priti Patel, what have you got for us tonight?
Well, yes, we've got a special budget analysis, and of course, Priti, she has a lot to say about it, as I'm sure you would imagine. But we're also covering this ongoing crisis at the BBC. To Jacob, our very own Nana Acquia has some very strong words, as does the Tory MP Andrea Jenkins as well. So we've got lots on the way tonight, but...
Well, it's great that you've got Priti because... Well, Priti's always got such strong views. Any preview as to what she's likely to say?
Let's just say she's even more unhappy than you about the corporation tax hike, Jacob.
Well, that's absolutely wonderful. I think Priti is one of the real stars of the Conservative Party. She's one of the nicest people in the party and the toughest. She was a terrific Home Secretary, so I'm rather jealous she's on your show and not mine. But you can listen to Priti with Dan after the weather, which is coming up in a moment. It's been particularly miserable in London tonight with drizzle and coldness. I expect the sun is shining in Somerset, though I saw a report today that said Yeovil was very low in sunshine during February. But I'm Jacob Rees-Mogg, and this has been State of the Nation Tonight.
Hello, good evening. Welcome to your latest weather update from the Met Office with me, Annie Shuttleworth. Thursday is going to be a much milder day than today, as we've got milder Atlantic air pushing up, being dragged up behind this warm front, which has been tracking across the country through the day, bringing many outbreaks of rain. So it's been a pretty wet day across the UK, and through this evening we'll continue to see some quite heavy rain and snow as that rain falls into the colder air across Scotland. So there are still warnings in force through this evening and into the early hours of Thursday. Further south, we'll see a drier night, but we'll see a brisk southerly breeze, and that will pick temperatures up through the night. So temperatures will increase by the time we get to the early hours of Thursday. So tomorrow will be a milder start than this morning. However, across parts of Wales, northwest England and southern Scotland, there's still a rain warning in force, so there could be some traffic on the roads.
Monday to Thursday nights on GB News. At 6, it's Dubes & Co. 7 o'clock, Farage. At 8, join Jacob Rees-Mogg. And at 9, Dan Wootton Tonight, followed by headliners on TV, radio and online. This is GB News.
It's all about family, being in people's living rooms, all the interaction and getting to know who our viewers and listeners are.
When I was young, my dad used to say, no, stop arguing. I wanted an outlet that would enable me to give my opinion.
People are going through a really hard time right now, and I know that you don't feel like you're being listened to by the establishment. I came to GB News because it's the People's Channel, and I want the audience to have their say on the events of the day.
We're dynamic. We do something different.
Democracy shows that the wisdom of the nation is in its people.
I get to travel to find out what the story is from a personal perspective.
The British people aren't fools. We know when we're not being told the full story.
We've got to work out how Britain moves forward from this.
It's the best country in the world.
The establishment had their chance. Now we're here to represent your views.
Britain's watching.
Britain's watching. Britain's watching.
We're proud to be GB News.
The People's Channel.
Britain's news channel.
We are GB News, the People's Channel.
And right across the United Kingdom.